Many people are confused about who to follow. This may be you. For the longest time, I've been searching about who is telling the truth. Some teachers say one thing, other teachers say another thing, and some teachers fight with each other. So how do you know whether the teacher that you follow is giving you correct, true, accurate information? And that's what we're going to try to understand in this video. So to understand this, we first need to start with the foundation. We want our teachers to solely teach us the truth. God is the ultimate source of truth. Therefore, if God ever spoke to humanity, then we should definitely listen because this will be truth. And fortunately for us, an entire nation claimed to have heard God speak, a claim that is almost impossible to refute, and a claim that no other religion makes. This nation was the Jewish nation, and they claimed that God's words were spoken to Moses at Mount Sinai in front of the entire nation. And when the nation couldn't handle God speaking to them directly, God dictated to Moses exactly what to write. And God further provided explanations on what these words meant, what these ideas that he was writing meant. Now, since that national public revelation, many people have popped up here and there claiming that they've also heard revelations from God. But if their revelations contradicted what God spoke to the entire nation, then we know that they can't be true. Especially when God said in this national revelation that nobody can add to the words that he spoke or subtract from the words that he spoke. Meaning, nobody who arises afterwards can contradict what he spoke at that national public revelation. Thus, his words there are eternally true. So when these people pop up claiming that they've heard revelations from God, and these revelations contradict what God previously had said, then we have good reason to reject that person's revelation. And incidentally, this eliminates all the other religions besides Judaism. If God ever spoke, it must have been to the Jews. But there are many leaders inside Judaism, many people who claim to be rabbis, rabbi meaning my teacher. Who should we follow? Are all of these rabbis trustworthy? Again, it seems most reasonable for us to follow those people who adhere exactly to what God said at Mount Sinai. But remember, what was said at Mount Sinai was not only the written Torah being the words that God told Moses to write, but it also contained explanations for what these words mean. For example, it says in the text, "On the Sabbath you shall do no work." What does work, melacha in Hebrew, mean? So God explained to Moses what this word means, how the Jews are supposed to rest on the Sabbath. So in order to live in right relation with God, the creator of everything, Moses must have taught the Israelites, the Jewish nation, what all of this stuff meant, what God told him all of these words mean. And here's where the mesorah, the chain of transmission, begins. So buckle up, we're going to go from Moses all the way till today so we know exactly who we should be following. And yes, the Jews have preserved this chain of transmission all the way up until the present moment. So we first see in the Torah that Moses taught the laws of God and transmitted the Torah to the priests and the elders of that generation. Moses' leadership was then continued through Joshua, who was appointed by God and authorized through Moses. And after Joshua, the elders of Israel knew the words of God and continued leading Israel in these commandments. And the elders taught the prophets, and the prophets guided the nation by calling everybody back to the Torah, to what God said at Mount Sinai. And the prophets transmitted these explanations to the men of the Great Assembly, who were a body of sages and prophets at the beginning of the Second Temple period, which was after the return of the Babylonian exile. And you may know some of these names. Some of the men of the Great Assembly include Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and Mordecai from Esther. These men of the Great Assembly taught students, thus transmitting these explanations further. Shimon HaTzadik was one of the last members of the Great Assembly, and one of the sages that received from him was Antigonus Ish Socho. And from there, the tradition passed to the Zugot, the pairs of the Sanhedrin, the great Jewish court. And the pairs were the leaders of this Sanhedrin, the Nasi and the Av Beit Din, the president and the head of the court. And these pairs continued the explanations pair by pair, generation through generation, until Hillel and Shammai. And Hillel and Shammai taught many students, and out of their world came the Tanaim, who were the sages of the Mishnah. Tanaim meaning repeaters or teachers. Now we're getting into written territory. The oral Torah, these explanations that were always taught orally, were never meant to be written down. Instead, it was meant to live from teacher to student, from generation to generation. But after the destruction of the Second Temple and Roman persecution and exile and the scattering of all of the Jewish communities, this old system of teaching from teacher to student was in danger. Students were dispersed, courts were weakened, communities were separated everywhere. And if the oral Torah, these explanations, remained only oral, parts of it could be forgotten or confused. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, one of the greatest of the Tanaim, gathered the teachings of earlier sages and organized them into a stable structure. This was an emergency act to preserve the oral Torah. And his compilation became known as the Mishnah. Part of the Mishnah is Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, and the people quoted there are the Tanaim. And so these Tanaim taught many students, and these students became teachers and taught many students. And so then the generations after the Tanaim became known as the Amoraim, meaning the speakers or the explainers, because they explained, analyzed, debated, and applied the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had written. And over time, their discussions developed into two great bodies of Gemara. The Gemara is the Amoraic analysis of the Mishnah. And so one of these works was produced in Israel, and it's commonly called the Jerusalem Talmud. And another of these works was produced in Babylonia, often called the Babylonian Talmud. And although both are sacred and important, today the Babylonian Talmud has more authority. It was accepted by most Jewish communities, contains more extensive analysis. But so that's what the Talmud is. It's the Mishnah with commentaries on this Mishnah, which is called the Gemara, and this comprises the Talmud, which means learning or instruction. And so after these sages, the Savaraim, the reasoners, they helped edit, clarify, and organize the Babylonian Talmud into the form that would later be transmitted through the generations. And so at this point, we have the written Torah, but we also have written down many of the explanations that God had said regarding this written Torah. We have the Mishnah and then the Talmud. But of course, this writing down of the explanations and the oral Torah can't cover all of the laws. That's in part why it was oral. But many of the key principles that apply for all eternity were explained in these texts. Continuing the chain, after the Savaraim came the Geonim. The word Gaon can mean excellency or pride. The Geonim were heads of yeshivot. Yeshivas are Jewish academies of Torah study. And Jewish communities from around the world sent in questions to the heads of these academies. And the Geonim, the heads, would answer these questions. And these became known as responsa literature. They are written rabbinic answers to real-life halakhic questions. Halakhic meaning Jewish law as it applies in this world. Almost done. After the Geonim came the Rishonim, meaning the earlier ones. The era of the Rishonim is crucial because they wrote some of the most foundational commentaries on the Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, and Halakha. But crucial for all of us is they produced major halakhic codes, like the Mishnah Torah that was compiled by Maimonides. In the Mishnah Torah, we find the first codification of Noahide law. Although the Noahide laws are found throughout the Torah, the Talmud, and later Responsa, Maimonides was one of the first major authorities to organize them into a compact legal code. And you find the Noahide laws in the Mishnah Torah in the Laws of Kings and Wars, chapters 8 through 10. But after the Rishonim came the Acharonim, meaning the later ones. At around the beginning of this era, Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, one of the most important codes in Jewish law. Jewish law continued to be explained and applied to new circumstances, which included medicine, business, technology, electricity, and many other areas of life. And that finally leads us to where we are today. I hope this history of transmission was helpful for you. But if you want to be as close as possible to what God said at Mount Sinai, you want someone to have received the Torah from someone who is inside this chain of transmission that we've gone over. Today, the people who are in line with this chain of transmission, this mesorah, are the observant Torah Jews. Specifically for teachers, the observant Torah rabbis, commonly called Orthodox rabbis. They are committed to keeping and teaching the laws as they were originally given at Mount Sinai, which is crucial because God at Mount Sinai says that these laws must be eternal. And they do so according to a way that it was explained at Mount Sinai, and the way it was preserved through the generations. And again, we know how these laws are meant to be lived because of the mesorah. because of the chain of transmission from Moses to Joshua to the sages to the Tanaim and the Mishnah to the Amoraim, the Talmud, to the Savraim, Gionim, Rishonim, Acharonim. This chain of transmission is recorded in the codes of Jewish law and through the recognized authorities and Torah teachers of every generation. But unfortunately for us, not every person with the title rabbi is trustworthy to follow. Not every rabbi is a reliable guide to truth. In serious Orthodox settings, the title rabbi usually means that a person studied for years at a yeshiva or rabbinic program, which is where they presumably learn Talmud, halakha, responsa literature, practical Jewish law, and then he was then tested by the rabbis or the institution, where he then received semicha, ordination, in this case rabbinic ordination. But this process is not uniform. There's no single worldwide rabbinic licensing board. The standards for different institutions and different rabbis can vary widely. For example, one rabbi might be trained in ritual slaughter. Another might be trained as a community rabbi. Another has the credentials of an actual Torah scholar and Torah authority in this Jewish law. So the title rabbi can hide a lot of differences. And some rabbis could spend many years studying, 10, 15 years studying, and others may have just passed an exam. Perhaps others could have received their ordination from an online program, which is not the same as receiving it from qualified teachers like it was throughout the generations, who then deem it necessary that this person's worthy of being rabbi. So in short, just because the person has a title rabbi does not mean that you should rely on them as a Torah authority. So how do we know then? Well, we should begin by asking, who taught this rabbi? A person can read many sources and read them incorrectly. In Judaism, you do not only learn what the texts say, but you learn what they mean. And we only know what they mean because of this mesorah, because of this chain of transmission. And this applies to all the Jewish texts, the written Bible, the Talmud, even the Jewish law codes. So a reliable rabbi was taught by qualified teachers, and these teachers were taught by teachers, and so on and so forth. But we should also ask, who tested this rabbi? What we ideally want to see is that this rabbi studied for years in a Torah academy, a yeshiva or kollel, that he was tested on practical halakha, that his examiners were respected rabbis and Torah authorities. And we obviously want to know what he got his rabbinic ordination in. If you're a Noahide, you don't want to receive advice from a person who got their rabbinic ordination in ritual slaughter. In this place where they studied, it should be recognized by the majority of the Orthodox community. If you don't know if it is, then you can easily research, especially with AI nowadays. But very importantly, we should also ask, who recognizes this rabbi? A rabbi may have a rabbinic certification, but is he recognized by the Orthodox community? Is he recognized by these institutions? Recognition means that other people inside this chain of transmission endorse what this rabbi says. And if they endorse it, then we know this rabbi is also probably in the chain of transmission. He's giving us the true explanations. And obviously, we should know what this rabbi is recognized for. If a rabbi is recognized as a good community rabbi, then he may not know the nuances of Noahide law, for example. However, if he's recognized for knowing the law and the intricacies of the law, then we could probably trust this other rabbi more when it comes to legal questions. But a real rabbi usually knows his limits, and he usually has his own teachers that he looks to. And usually a warning sign is if a rabbi claims that they're the only one who's actually telling the truth, because many people have received this chain of transmission and know the truth. And finally, we should ask, what kind of person is he? A true Torah scholar is usually refined by the Torah. His character traits are usually refined. Of course, no human being is perfect. But if a teacher is constantly insulting other rabbis or humiliating people, this may be a warning sign. So now what do you do? If you are a Jew, the ideal is to have an Orthodox rabbi who knows you and your situation. But if you're a non-Jew, it's a little bit more difficult. Many rabbis are well versed in the Jewish laws, but a lot of them are not well versed in the Noahide laws, which is what the non-Jews are supposed to follow, the 7 commandments. So if you are a Noahide and you don't have a local rabbi who is very knowledgeable in this area, I have a recommendation that I think checks all of the boxes that we've gone over so far. This rabbi is Rabbi Moshe Weiner. Other than Maimonides' 2 chapters on Noahide law and the Mishnah Torah, Rabbi Weiner is the only other authority to produce a serious halakhic work on Noahide law, and it's way more extensive than what Maimonides had originally written. His codification is the Sheva Mitvot Hashem in Hebrew, which is translated as the Divine Code in English. If you're a Noahide, I strongly encourage you to get the Divine Code if you know English. His work basically functions like the Shulchan Aruch for Noahide law. He organizes the practical applications and the foundations of the 7 Noahide commandments in a structured halakhic way, like how all the Jewish laws are codified. He organizes the law, traces the sources, explains the categories, and shows how the halakha is applied. But of course, we have to ask the question, how do we know that Rabbi Weiner is within this chain of transmission? How do we know that he's reliable? And this is where recognition matters. Rabbi Weiner's Sheva Mitvot Hashem, or the Divine Code, has received support and approbations from major Orthodox authorities, including Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, Rav Shlomo Moshe Amar, and Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz. But we shouldn't just stop there. Are these men who recommend his books also men within this chain, this mesorah? When we look at them, the answer is yes. For example, Rav Amar served as the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel from 2003 to 2013, and he later became the Sephardic chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And this matters because the chief rabbinate is a major public rabbinical institution. He was recognized at the highest levels of the Sephardic Jewish world. Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz was also a major authority. He served as the heads of many recognized rabbinic institutions. He also received semicha from Yeshiva University, which is one of the major Orthodox rabbinic institutions in America. And he was trusted as a rabbinical judge in real halakhic Jewish legal cases. So when a work like the Divine Code receives support like this, it's very significant. It's the kind of recognition that we are looking for, to know that we are reading the truth. So if you are a Noahide looking for reliable guidance, the Divine Code is the strongest place to begin, in my opinion, because it's structured, it's source-based, halakhic, and supported by major Torah authorities. And since the Divine Code is within the chain of transmission that we've talked about, and therefore we can trust it, then rabbis who are aligned with the Divine Code are also likely within this chain of transmission, and thus you can also likely trust them. And similarly, since we know that Rabbi Moshe Weiner, the author of the Divine Code, is within the chain of transmission and we can trust him, then we can likely also trust who he himself supports and trusts. These people that he supports are also likely within the chain of transmission, giving us the truth. For example, Rabbi Weiner supports Dr. Rabbi Michael Schulman, the president and executive director of Ask Noah International, who's a brilliant scholar and teacher. Thus, his words and works we can likely also trust as being reliable and truthful. But anyway, I hope this video helps you choose trustworthy Torah teachers. Don't follow someone just because his title is rabbi. It took me a little while to figure that out, but now that I know, I've committed this channel basically to following the Divine Code on everything. I'll always make sure to give Rabbi Weiner's opinion and sources and all this stuff. And similarly, when I do research, I'm asking those questions. Who taught him? Who tested him? What was he tested on? Who recognizes him? The recognition one is very key. But also, is he faithful to Torah? Is he a good person? Again, I think it's easiest to follow the Divine Code and all the sources that he recommends, because we know that these sources are within the chain of transmission, and other rabbis who are aligned with the Divine Code are, I think, good ones to follow as well. But hopefully with these questions, you can start to make your own analysis, because there are many rabbis who are giving truthful information that are within the chain of transmission. Anyway, I hope this helped. I know I would have liked this video about 2 years ago. Thank you, as always, for watching.